Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 1985 film Silver Bullet. It's a werewolf film, which the 80s seemed like the time for werewolf films because after that, if we got werewolf films, they weren't that great. Heard about this one over the years a few times from people, and I've always said I haven't seen it. And people are always like, oh man, you have to see that, especially if you like werewolf films. I see why. I didn't love this film, but I quite enjoyed the film, and I would definitely watch it again. It is a fun time. Excuse me. This one, directed by Daniel Attias, or Attias, did lots and lots and lots of TV shows. That's their main directing credits, including shows such as Alias, 6 Feet Under, House, Entourage, Homeland, and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Good shows that a lot of people liked. Written by Stephen King, this is obviously based off of the story, the novelette, as they say in the opening credits, Cycle of the Werewolf by Stephen King, and then he also did the screenplay for it, so that is good. It's always good when you get someone who actually wrote the base material to then adapt the screenplay, because otherwise you end up getting a lot kind of lost between the two, or it just doesn't end up having the same feel or intention to the film. According to Attias, Gary Busey actually ad-libbed a lot of his lines. Obviously, Gary Busey playing Uncle Red in this, who I'm just going to refer to as Red going forward. Great part of the film. I love Gary Busey in this. Actually, I'm lucky enough to have met Gary Busey many years ago with some friends, and my one buddy got him to start singing because he was talking to him about how he felt like he really got snubbed by the Oscars with his performance as Buddy Holly. And so he then was like, oh, I heard that you wrote some of the songs. And he was like, yeah, actually, I was involved in helping to write some of the songs, and then started singing them, and they were singing it together. It was kind of a really cool moment. Plus, Gary Busey was super nice, and he's just a fun dude. His character of Red, he does wonderfully in this film, and I'm assuming it's great that he ended up ad-libbing because I love his lines in this, and he just brings this kind of fun, goofy aspect to the film. Obviously, that's kind of what that character is supposed to be, mainly because Gary Busey was cast. Otherwise, why would you cast him? Excuse me. Producer Dino De Laurentiis was actually very unhappy with the look of the werewolf, apparently, which I can totally understand. When you see the werewolf in its entirety, the proportions do look kind of off. That's why I'm more of a fan of them kind of just showing like the bits and pieces of the werewolf within this film. Like when they're just kind of showing the eyes or just the teeth or like a swipe of the hand, you know, those types of things. This definitely is one of those films where less is more because the werewolf design really is not so great. It looks really goofy. So I think that kind of ends up taking away a little bit from the very end of the film, just because that's when you see the werewolf the best and you're just like, not looking so hot, to be honest. Early iterations of the script apparently had the werewolf speaking. I'm assuming that was probably actually in the novelette then. And that is to say, like, not when it's Reverend Lowe, but the werewolf actually speaking as a werewolf, which, you know, that really does not happen in werewolf films. And I'm assuming that's why they chose to not go that direction. Also, if you have that particular look of a werewolf that wasn't good, and then it's talking on top of that, probably would just be a little too ridiculous, in my opinion. So, reportedly, Don Coscarelli was going to direct this film, but he ended up leaving because of creative differences with Dino De Laurentiis. That seems to be the thing that is said all the time when directors end up not actually completing the job or sticking with it. It's always creative differences. Personality conflicts, maybe. Actual creative differences, like I want the story to be like this, I want it to be like this, potentially, I don't know. But it makes you wonder, what would this film have been like if Coscarelli had done it? I'm a fan of Coscarelli, love the Phantasm films, so I assume that the film probably would have been even better, in my opinion. But then again, who knows? This is the same script. Of course, a werewolf film starts with a shot of a full moon. Very cliche, but hey, this is the 80s. Cliche is the name of the game, pretty much, with 80s horror films. So, starting with a full moon, of course. The flying severed head of the drunkard in the beginning is very fun, and I like the touch that the county coroner actually rules his death just an accident, because they're just like, oh, This guy is a known drunkard. He probably just passed out drunk, and then a train came by and severed his head from his body. But that would be a clean cut. Whereas a werewolf taking his head off with its claws would be a much more jagged cut. So there's really a lot of problems with that actual logic. So the county coroner, probably not so great. But you can understand it because this is kind of like, you don't get the idea that this is a big town. You get the idea this is kind of like a much smaller, quaint town. So coroner, probably not the best at his job. They set Marty, the character of Marty, played by Corey Haim, up as a well-meaning kid, but kind of prone to making poor decisions early on. Also, I love how initially, when you see him in his wheelchair, they make the wheelchair sound like a motorcycle. And then later on, it sounds a little bit more just like a lawnmower. And then he gets his upgrade from Uncle Red to the Silver Bullet. And I really love the fact that it's kind of a dual-purpose title for the film. I definitely like it more than Cycle of the Werewolf, but that one is also kind of clever because it goes both ways as well. I just like Silver Bullet more because it's obviously the silver bullet that's used to kill a werewolf and the name of the new souped up awesome motorcycle-like wheelchair that Red has made for Marty. The character of Marty really endears himself to the audience when he gives money to Jane for her new pantyhose after he and his friend had pulled that prank with the snake, which obviously he did not want it to go that far. He feels bad, so he comes and gives her part of his money, which you assume, him being a child, he doesn't have a whole lot of it. Whatever allowance he gets is probably pretty paltry. So it's a very heartfelt gesture that the audience really starts to look at him and be like, oh, he's really a good guy. Like, he's just a precocious little kid who just gets wrapped up in going a little too far sometimes, or being around people who go a little too far. He's really good at heart. The pregnant woman attempting suicide is pretty well done, and they don't show too much of the werewolf. That scene of the mauling is what I mean, where she gets attacked. Now, I think it's interesting that they actually reference that later when Reverend Lowe has kind of cornered Marty in that little, like, bridge shack thing. And he's basically talking about how he killed that woman before she was going to commit suicide, so he really helped her because committing suicide actually, damns you to hell. And by killing her, he wasn't allowing her to actually do this, exact her suicide on herself. So he was basically sending her to heaven, whereas she would go to hell. So you see this whole thing that pops up with Reverend Lowe really painting his slayings in a different light than how it's appearing to the rest of the town. He's really rationalizing it to himself as kind of being ordained by, well, I don't want to say ordained by God, but like, since he's a religious figure and he's a religious leader, it's okay, basically. And he really is just like, I'm helping these people in a certain way. And it's like, don't think so, buddy. Well, something's up with the crappy looking shack by the way that they shoot it and the music that accompanies it. Yeah, that shack that they see initially, where like something weird is going on there. It didn't really end up panning out to being a whole lot. That was kind of more of like a red herring misdirect type thing, but yeah. Oh, and also going back real quick, because I didn't talk too much, the way the mauling of the woman who was trying to commit suicide looked really good. Like, and that's the thing of the best way to shoot that type of werewolf that doesn't look so good is just like, really tight, quick shots on like the teeth, the claws, and then showing like the actual like ripping into the flesh and all the blood. And then you show the big impact of the aftermath of her dead body. The introduction of Uncle Red makes you think he's not playing with a full deck, if you get the little pun in there. But yeah, he seems, pretty loose. Part of that being, you get the idea as an alcoholic, as he's just drinking directly from a wild turkey bottle. And then later on, you really get the idea that he's an alcoholic because of when Marty calls him after his first encounter with the werewolf, and he, wakes up in bed, rolls over and grabs the phone, and on his bedside table is a very far down bottle of wild turkey. So you get the idea then that he's always drinking. He is an alcoholic. So he's an interesting character because he ends up being a hero. He's not like the main hero, but he is a hero in it. But he's extremely flawed. Now, I'm assuming that there was some of Stephen King himself baked into that actual character, because as I'm sure most of us know, Stephen King is an alcoholic. He hasn't relapsed. He's been sober for a long time, but he, has, because they always say that, you are always an alcoholic. You just, get sober. So he's had a problem with alcohol at one point in his life. So a lot of the times you end up seeing that in his stories. And it just makes you wonder when you see a film like this, how much of himself was he placing in the character of Red? And maybe it was just the alcoholic aspect of it. When Red and Nan are arguing, you see how she views Marty's life in a negative light for the most part, but he conveys the idea that there's really a lot more to him. Like, he literally says that to her. There's a lot more to that kid than you're giving him credit for. And it just kind of shows that even though he's the one that people aren't taking seriously, even though he's the one who's looked at by society as having a messed up, flawed life, he is the one that is seeing so much more in who Marty is and his actual abilities, as opposed to everyone else looking at him and seeing the wheelchair and not actually seeing the person Marty and what he actually could do. So it makes you in that moment like Red even more, even though he's so flawed. The greenhouse scene and the kill at the end is quite fun. They set up a really cool ambiance with that. The way they shot it, the dark lighting, and then I particularly like how there's like a bit of mist that's in there, and then also the backlighting that they do for the shots where you're seeing the light through like the gaps in the boards on the floor and in the wall. Looks really good. And then obviously when the guy gets pulled down, because he's on the second level and he gets kind of pulled down from below. Pretty good. And then he gets impaled on that plank that's sticking up. That's pretty good. Andy really can't keep his mouth shut. He's always trying to start something at the bar. He represents the unruly, vigilante-minded portion of the town. You are supposed to kind of see Haller, the sheriff, as the cool, calm, let's do this by the books, let's have, justice actually prevail part of the town. That's what he's representing. And then you have Andy, the loud, chaotic, vengeance-driven vigilante who's representing that aspect of the town. Now, obviously, at least for a while, well, I would say overall, because they don't revisit it, that aspect, Andy and his followers, win out within the town because Haller himself really backs down. Because there is that one scene where the father of the one child who's slain, the first child, and actually only child, who's slain by the werewolf when they find his bloody kite, because they don't want to show that because pretty taboo. When he kind of makes his speech in the bar after Andy and Haller are kind of, butting heads about how, basically something needs to be done because he's lost his son, and then he takes sides with Andy, and then that kind of rallies everyone else. And then that's when everyone goes out and they go into the woods. So you see that everyone just gets wrapped up in the emotion of it and wanting to exact that vigilante justice, even though Haller had said, I don't think this is the way to go. But in that moment, after the father makes his speech, Haller just totally shuts down. Like, he backs down because it's kind of like, what does he say to that? He doesn't want to seem insensitive. He doesn't want to, step on the sorrow and the grief of that father. So he just backs down instead, and then people just go the wrong direction, which leads to their deaths. So he should have felt bad about that. Note that the community seems to be really affected and pay attention when the kid gets killed, because when the first few people die at the hands of the werewolf, the community doesn't seem to react that much. It's just some headlines in the paper. But once the kid gets killed, then you see everyone showing up for the funeral. You see people really talking about it more, really starting to take it more seriously. And that's the thing. Like, once it's someone who's viewed as young and innocent, it totally changes what's going on. And that actually is the case when it comes to actual crime in real life as well. The line where the lady, when they're in the woods going out for their vigilante justice, the lady who says, "Are you gonna make lemonade in your pants?" to the one guy, 100% that line caught me off guard. Did not see it coming. I thought it was funny, the way it was written, but also the way it was delivered, and the fact that it just came out of nowhere. Like, I was just like, oh, you're going to make lemonade in your pants. Never heard it said that way. It was funny. That's an insane amount of fog. That waist-high fog, and they're like, something's moving on the floor. Like, of course, because everything could be hiding in that, because it's literally waist-high fog. Ridiculous, because I don't think that exists. I've never seen a place where fog gets that freaking high, but, you know, it serves the purpose of what they're trying to do there. Pretty over the top, but, you know, it makes for a relatively fun scene. Although I would have liked to have seen more carnage, a lot more gore, a lot more fun killings. I really would have liked to see that. The baseball bat thing was interesting, how the werewolf starts using the baseball bat, like, under the fog. And, like, the werewolf hand is popping up with the bat and then going down and then popping up above the fog and going down. I like the way that looks. It's a cool shot. But I just want to see more of the gore. You know, us horror fans, that's what we want. The nightmare that Reverend Lowe has is a fun nightmare, but the people turning into werewolves don't really look that good. Like the main werewolf, they don't look that good. So when you first see that, you can view it kind of as being like a premonition that Reverend Lowe is having, because at that point, there's no suspicion placed on him. But then when you find out that he actually is the werewolf, you think back and you're like, oh, that's kind of more of like a fever dream where like he's infected with lycanthropy, and those are the kind of nightmarish dreams he has because of being a werewolf, and it totally changes. So I like the fact that they actually include that nightmare scene because of the context changing later. The silver bullet Red unveils is pretty cool because it looks like a motorcycle, the wheelchair. Already talked about that. As soon as Red gives Morty fireworks, you know they'll end up being used against the werewolf, and in wonderful fashion, because I love that scene where Marty's just lighting off the fireworks on that bridge. Werewolf shows up and he's like, what do I do? Gonna shoot fireworks at the werewolf. Luckily enough, hits him right in the eye, and then that leaves the trail that they're then able to follow in order to find out who is that werewolf, because someone's missing an eye at this point, obviously. And it's the big shock to people that it happens to be the Reverend in town, not any of these other people that you would assume maybe it is. I'm sure plenty of people when they first saw this film would think maybe it's Andy, because he seems to be almost feral himself and have a lot of anger issues. Just saying. Yeah, and I love how they shot the firework in the eye scene. That does look good. I did like that. You know, I already said that about Red being an alcoholic with the wild turkey on his bedside table. I like the touch of Jane going around the town collecting bottles and cans while using that as a cover to see everyone's eyes, to find out who is this werewolf, who lost their eye last night, who has a patch over it. And then she certainly does not see it coming that it happens to be the Reverend when she comes up on him gardening. And then that's also when she finds that bat, the Peacemaker, that's all gnarled up. I think she says that it looked like King Kong used it as a toothpick, I think is what she says, which is a pretty good line. Good twist that the Reverend Lowe is the guy. Nobody in town would suspect it, and it makes you think about the meaning of his nightmare again, like I already said. And finally, the speed of the silver bullet comes to be important as Marty gets chased by the Reverend in his car. That was a fun scene. I've seen car chases in films before, but I've never seen a car chasing a wheelchair in a film before, and that was interesting, especially that extra aspect of literally him like trying to run him off the road on that bridge. Crazy. Pretty intense, pretty good. You see how twisted Reverend Lowe is by justifying his slayings as basically being in line with God being okay with it, with the whole kind of rationalizing the killing the woman before she killed herself situation. It gives you insight into the fact that he's not ashamed of being a werewolf, really. He's fully embracing it and just being like, you know what? When I'm killing people, it's actually okay. Excuse me. I love the use of no music when Haller is poking around the church at night. It does create a lot more impact for when the music finally does show up, when the Reverend literally pops up out of nowhere and surprises Haller and ends up killing him. So, excuse me, getting a dry throat. So using very little to no music really can have a great impact, and I think it's showcased very well in this whole scene. Not sure why the werewolf likes using the bat as a weapon. It does seem odd, especially because initially he just takes someone's head off with his claws. So I think he could just keep doing that. The baseball bat thing is just weird. I just don't understand why they decided to go that route. It also makes the killings less fun, let's be honest. Because getting in there and getting more messy is what we want to see the werewolf doing. And of course, the next full moon falls on Halloween when, Red and Jane and Marty have their plan to, I was going to say lure the werewolf, but no, they, excuse me, they just wait for him to show up because they have a feeling he's coming. Plenty of people yell at the screen at the moment when Red actually takes the silver bullet out of the revolver. I didn't, actually yell out loud, but in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, come on, dude. Like, why would you take it out? Like, I understand that you're questioning the situation, but then taking the bullet out, now you're extremely vulnerable, and I'm sure every audience member was thinking the same thing. Maybe some actually shouting at their screen. The ending, though, overall was in my opinion. Wasn't a big fan of the ending. I thought it ended a little bit abruptly. It felt like it needed a little bit more, in my opinion. Overall, I think it was a weird choice in this film to have Jane be the narrator of it, especially because she's not really the main character so much. Marty is really the main character. He gets the most screen time. He's focused on the most. He has the most interesting character. Jane is not actually a very interesting character. She is next to interesting characters like Marty and like Red, so it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense that she would be the narrator. Initially, I was thinking that she was the narrator because in the finale, Red and Marty would end up dying, so they can't tell the story. I think it would have been better if they went that way because not only would it make more sense for her to be the narrator in that instance, but it would also, I think, have made for a more interesting ending because, get some tough emotions in there. Like, we've already been endeared to Red and Marty. Kill them off. It'd have a lot more impact. It was just kind of an ending. Some people could actually read into this movie as an allegory for the secret predatory nature of some religious leadership positions. I doubt that was the intent at the time, but watching it nowadays, knowing that there have been molestation issues within the church structure, some people could watch this film and see that as an allegory for the predatory nature that these molesters use when they're in this position, and the predatory nature of the Reverend, who's literally hiding in plain sight, and no one would suspect him when he's being literally predatory by going after people, and a kid in this instance. Or kids, multiple kids, really. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Silver Bullet. I did enjoy it, like I said. Out of 5 stars with half stars in play, it's a very solid 3-star film. I was between 3 and 3.5, but it feels more right at 3 stars. So I'm going 3 stars. But if other people were 3.5 or higher, I understand it. But let me know your thoughts on Silver Bullet. Go ahead and put it down in the comments. You can talk about that or any other horror you want to. Do me a quick favor, though. Hit subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. It is quick, painless, costs you no money, and it keeps me motivated. Literally the best way to repay me if you like anything I've ever done. It really is. Also, hit the notification bell button. Then you know when I'm putting up my new videos, and I'm doing 4 a week at this point, which I think is a good amount. Regardless, though, thank you very much for taking your time to watch this particular video, and until next time, keep it brutal.